The night I found my director sitting alone in the stairwell of a hospital gala, still wearing her name badge, crying quietly into her hands, I almost walked back through the door and pretended I hadn't seen anything. I wish I could tell you. I'm the kind of person who always does the right thing without hesitation. I'm not. I stood there for a full 3 seconds, hand on the door handle, heart somewhere in my throat, genuinely considering whether it was safer to just leave her alone. She was Sylvia Okafor, Regional Director of Operations for one of the largest hospital networks in Ontario. The kind of person who could end a meeting with a single look. I was a 28-year-old facilities coordinator who still ate lunch at his desk because he didn't know where else to go. But something kept me from walking away. Maybe it was the sound of her breathing, uneven, careful, like someone trying very hard not to fall apart. Maybe it was the fact that she was sitting on the concrete floor of the stairwell in a dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent, and there was something so strangely human about that detail that I couldn't ignore it. So I stayed. I should probably tell you how I got there. Not just to the stairwell, but to this place in my life where this story even made sense. I grew up in Sudbury, which is the kind of northern Ontario city that people from Toronto have vaguely heard of but couldn't find on a map. My parents were both nurses. My dad at the Health Sciences North Emergency Department, my mother at a long-term care facility on the east side of town. I grew up understanding that the healthcare system was a machine that ran on exhausted people, and I grew up watching those people try their best anyway. When I eventually moved to Waterloo for school and then to Toronto after graduating, I thought I understood how institutions worked. I did not understand how institutions worked. I landed the job at Hartwell Regional Health Network through a connection my former professor had. A mid-level facilities coordination role that was officially about managing service contracts and physical infrastructure, but was really about being the person everyone called when something went wrong at 2 in the morning. A toilet flooding an MRI suite, a heating system failing during a January cold snap, a generator contract dispute that somehow became my problem at 11 p.m. on a Friday. I had been at Hartwell for 7 months when I met Sylvia Okafor properly for the first time. She had transferred in from a health authority position in British Columbia 6 months before I arrived, and by the time I started, her reputation had already settled into the walls of the building like weather. People talked about her the way they talked about Toronto winters, not with hatred exactly, but with a kind of resigned respect. You prepared, you layered up, you did not assume it would be kind. She was methodical in a way that felt almost clinical. Every report that crossed her desk came back with annotations. Not angry ones, but precise ones. Questions you hadn't thought to ask, data gaps you hadn't noticed. I had my first direct email exchange with her 3 weeks into my job, about a HVAC vendor contract that was up for renewal. I had put together what I thought was a thorough analysis. Her reply was 4 sentences, all of them questions I could not immediately answer. I went back and did 4 more hours of research before I responded. After that, I started working differently. Not because she praised me for it. She didn't, not in any way I recognized at the time, but because her questions had a way of making me realize how much I'd been skimming the surface of things and calling it thoroughness. There's a specific kind of person who makes you better just by existing near them, and you resent them for it even as it's happening. I resented Sylvia Okafor for exactly 5 months. By month 6, I was starting to think about leaving. Not dramatically, I wasn't miserable. The work was interesting, and the team was decent, but there was a particular kind of loneliness in feeling like you were invisible to the person whose opinions you'd started to care about most. I hadn't done anything wrong. My performance reviews were good, but Sylvia and I interacted only when necessary, and those interactions were always professional and always brief. And I couldn't shake the feeling that I was somehow just not quite what the role needed. I had started drafting a message to a former colleague about a position in Hamilton when the invitation to the Hartwell Annual Recognition Gala arrived in my inbox. Attendance wasn't exactly mandatory, but it was the kind of optional that everyone understood to mean mandatory. The event was held at the Arcadian Court downtown, a venue that always surprised people who'd never been there, a ballroom tucked inside a Bay Street office building like a secret kept from the street. I borrowed a blazer from my roommate because mine was still at my parents' house in Sudbury from the last time I'd been home for a funeral, and I told myself I'd stay for 2 hours, say the right things to the right people, and leave before the speeches got too long. I did not leave after 2 hours. I got there at 7 and spent the first hour doing what I always did at these things, orbiting the edges, talking to the people I already knew, keeping my drink in my hand as a prop that made standing alone look intentional. The room was genuinely beautiful in that slightly performative way of institutional galas: gold lighting, round tables with white linens, a string quartet playing near the entrance that no one was really listening to. People who spent their days in scrubs or fluorescent-lit admin offices stood around looking slightly uncomfortable in their formal wear, and that discomfort was somehow more humanizing than anything that happened during normal work hours. Sylvia arrived at 8:15. I noticed because the energy in the room shifted. Not dramatically. She wasn't the kind of person who commanded a room through warmth or charisma. It was more like the shift you feel when the temperature changes, a subtle recalibration. People straightened slightly. Conversations paused just long enough. She was wearing a dark green dress and her hair was pinned up, and she moved through the room with the same deliberate efficiency she brought to everything else. She shook hands. She exchanged a few sentences with the executives nearest the front. She accepted a glass of sparkling water from a passing server. From across the room, she looked completely composed. But I had spent enough time studying Sylvia Okafor's communication style to notice the thing she couldn't control. She kept checking her phone. Not obviously. She was too practiced for that. But every 4 or 5 minutes, her eyes dropped briefly to the clutch she was holding, and the set of her jaw changed for just a moment before she brought it back. Something was wrong. I didn't act on it immediately. It wasn't my place. She was my director. We weren't friends. We barely had conversations that went beyond the transactional. I turned back to the people I was talking to and reminded myself that her problems were not my problems. 40 minutes later, I stepped out to use the restroom and found a different route back to the main hall, down a service corridor that connected through a stairwell between the event level and the floor above. And that's where I found her. She was sitting on the 3rd step from the bottom, her back against the wall, her shoes off beside her, her clutch on the step above. She had her hands over her face, and she was trying very hard not to make noise while she cried. I stood there for those 3 seconds. Then I let the door close behind me quietly and sat down on the bottom step. I didn't say anything. I didn't have anything useful to say. I just sat there, close enough that she would know she wasn't alone, far enough that she had room to breathe. After a moment, I heard her exhale, long and slow, the kind of breath that people release when they realize they've been found and they're too tired to keep pretending. "I'm fine," she said. Her voice was steadier than I expected. "Okay," I said. A pause. "You don't have to stay." "I know." She didn't say anything to that. Neither did I. The stairwell was quiet except for the muffled sound of the gala somewhere above us and the distant hum of the building's mechanical systems, sounds I'd come to know very well over 7 months of fixing things. After a while, she lowered her hands. She didn't look at me directly, but she stopped hiding either. "Did anyone see me come in here?" she asked. "I don't think so." She nodded once, pressed her fingers to the corners of her eyes, careful not to smear anything. Then she was quiet again, and I let the quiet sit. It was another few minutes before she said anything real. She told me she'd gotten a call at 7:30, just before the formal welcome remarks started. A message passed through the board's administrative assistant that the Whitmore Group, a major philanthropic partner that had been funding an equipment modernization program across 3 of Hartwell's community health sites, had withdrawn their commitment, not reduced it, withdrawn it entirely, effective end of the current quarter. The program had been her initiative. She had spent 2 years building the partnership, presenting the case to the board, negotiating the terms, managing the relationship. It was supposed to represent the next phase of Hartwell's community care expansion, new imaging equipment for sites in underserved neighborhoods, telehealth infrastructure, mobile screening units, things that actually changed outcomes for patients who had fewer options. And now it was gone, over a disagreement she hadn't been told was coming, about a governance clause she hadn't been given the chance to address. She explained this without inflection, the way people describe disasters they haven't fully processed yet. Her voice was precise and even and completely at odds with the tears that had been there when I walked in. "The board meeting is Thursday," she said. "I'm going to have to walk in there and explain to 12 people how I let a 2-year partnership collapse without warning." "Did you let it collapse?" I asked. She looked at me then, the first time she'd made direct eye contact since I sat down. Her expression was unreadable for a moment. "That's what they'll ask." That's not what I asked. Another silence. Shorter this time. No, she said. I didn't. But in these rooms, the distinction between what happened and who's responsible for it is often more political than it is accurate. I understood that. Maybe not from her level, but I understood it. She picked up her clutch from the step above her and turned it over in her hands. Not opening it, just holding it. A small, restless motion that was so unlike her usual stillness that it felt almost like watching a different person. I didn't expect this to hit me the way it did, she said, more quietly. I've handled setbacks before. Bigger ones, maybe. I don't know why tonight. She stopped. Started again. There are real patients at those sites. People who've been waiting on that equipment. And I have to go back in there and smiles at the same people who'll be in that boardroom Thursday and pretend I don't know yet what's going to happen. I didn't try to fix it. I didn't offer perspective or silver linings or the kind of reassurance that's really just about making the other person feel better so you can stop sitting with their discomfort. I just said, "That sounds exhausting." She exhaled again. Something in her shoulders shifted. "It is," she said, simply, without performance. Just the truth. We sat there a bit longer. At some point she put her shoes back on, which seemed like a signal that she was close to being ready to go back. I got up from the bottom step and offered my hand to help her stand, more out of reflex than anything else. She hesitated for a moment, the kind of hesitation that's about pride, not the gesture, and then she took it. We stood in the stairwell, and for a second neither of us moved toward the door. "I owe you something," she said. "You don't. You've been at Hartwell for 7 months," she said. "I know your work better than you think I do." I didn't know what to do with that, so I didn't respond. "I'm harder on the people I think can handle it," she said. It wasn't an apology exactly. It was more like an explanation that it's been sitting in a drawer for a while. I don't always get the calibration right. I thought about the 4 hours of research I'd done after her 4-sentence email. I thought about the report I'd rewritten 3 times, because I could hear her hypothetical questions while I was drafting it. I thought about how much better my work had gotten without anyone ever once telling me it was getting better. "It worked," I said, "for what it's worth." She looked at me for a moment, and then, for the first time in 7 months of working in the same building as Sylvia Okafor, she smiled. Not broadly. Not the performed smile I'd seen in boardrooms and staff meetings. A small, real one, the kind that happens before you can stop it. "I need to go back in there," she said. "I know." She reached for the door handle, then paused. "I saw the message you drafted to Patrick Hendricks in Hamilton," she said. "It was open on your screen last Tuesday when I walked through the floor." Everything stopped for a second. "I don't make a habit of reading people's private correspondence," she added. "I saw enough to understand what it was." I didn't say anything. I was trying to recalibrate fast and failing. "I should have said something sooner," she said. "I should have said a lot of things sooner, but I'm asking you not to send it." Her voice had changed. Still controlled, still precise, but underneath it, something stripped down and genuine. "Hartwell needs people who ask the right questions," she said, "who follow up when things don't add up, who stay when the reasonable thing would be to leave." She paused. "I need people like that, more than I'm good at saying." I leaned against the wall behind me and thought about Sudbury, my parents coming home from shifts that had lasted too long, pulling off their shoes at the door, sitting at the kitchen table with cups of tea that went cold before they remembered to drink them. The particular kind of tired that came from caring about a system that didn't always care back, and showing up anyway. I thought about what it had cost Sylvia Okafor to say what she'd just said. "I'm not sending it," I told her. She didn't say thank you, not exactly. But she held my gaze for a moment in the way that means something between two people who don't say more than they have to. Then she opened the stairwell door, and the sound of the gala rushed in. Clinking glasses, overlapping conversation, the string quartet starting up to somewhere, and we walked back in together. I don't know how many people noticed us coming through the same door. Probably some saw. I didn't particularly care, and I had the impression that for the first time in a while, Sylvia didn't either. The weeks that followed were the hardest I'd experienced at Hartwell. The Whitmore Group's withdrawal went public internally faster than anyone had hoped. The board meeting Thursday was tense. There were conversations in hallways that stopped when certain people walked by, and a few of the longer-tenured staff started talking about restructuring, in the way people talk about restructuring when they mean something else entirely. But something had changed, not in the institutional way, not immediately, not in any policy or organizational chart, just between us and then gradually in the way she led. Sylvia started asking for input differently, not outsourcing decisions, she was still the one making them, but including the people closest to the problems in the conversation before the solutions were already drafted. She sent me a direct message one morning that said only, "What's the vendor situation on the mobile unit contracts?" Real answer, not the briefing note version. I told her. She used it. She was still demanding. She still sent emails that were 4 sentences of questions instead of acknowledgement. But something in the calibration had shifted, the way she'd described it in the stairwell. She started saying out loud, in meetings, who had contributed what. Not performatively, briefly, specifically, the way you'd want someone to do it if you were the one being mentioned. The equipment program eventually got restructured. It took 8 months of Sylvia renegotiating with 2 different funding partners, writing 3 separate proposals to the provincial ministry, and presenting to the board 4 times before they approved a revised version of the initiative, scaled back from the original but alive. The mobile screening unit started operating out of a community health center in Scarborough the following spring. I know because I coordinated the site logistics for the installation, which was not glamorous work, but it was the kind of not glamorous work that mattered. At some point during those 8 months, I stopped thinking about Hamilton. I want to be clear about something, because I've told parts of this story to a few people, and the question always comes up eventually. Sylvia Okafor and I did not become anything other than colleagues who understood each other better than either of us expected to. She was my director. That line was real, and it stayed real. What changed was something more useful than that. I started to understand that the distance I'd experienced wasn't indifference. And she started to understand, I think, that appearing untouchable had costs she hadn't been tracking. About a year after the gala, she was named VP of Regional Operations, a role 2 levels above where she'd been when I joined. At her first all-staff address in the new position, she said something that I've thought about since. She said that the measure of any health system wasn't found in its best moments, but in what it did in the difficult ones, and that the people who kept it running during those moments were usually not the ones in the room making the decisions, but the ones ensuring the building stayed warm and the contracts held and the lights came on. She didn't look at me when she said it, but she also did not look at me. I still work at Hartwell, not in the same role. I moved into a health infrastructure planning position about 6 months ago, a step up that required Sylvia's endorsement on the internal transfer and which she gave without hesitation, which I know because she told me directly instead of making me find out through HR. There are days when the work is genuinely hard, and the system is genuinely frustrating, and I sit at my desk wondering what exactly I'm holding on to. On those days, I sometimes think about a concrete stairwell, the distant sound of a string quartet, and a woman who built something significant, watched it nearly collapse, and came back through the door anyway. Not because the path forward was clear, not because the outcome was guaranteed, but because the work still mattered, and there were people depending on it, and leaving wasn't something she was willing to do. I learned that from her. I try to remember it when it's my turn,